All right. All right. So this is about me. So I'm one of the co-founders of Nebraska Global, and my focus has always been on the product development side. So I've been the CTO of Nebraska Global as well as the Don't Panic Labs. I know the names are confusing, but Nebraska Global is kind of the fund side, the investment fund side, and Don't Panic Labs is where the people are. They're actually building the products. I also just finished up as an adjunct faculty member at the Rake School down at UNL, which I worked with mostly in the upperclassmen, and I focused more on instruction in and around software design. That happens to be in software architecture. That happens to be an area of passion for myself as well as the folks at Don't Panic Labs. So you can see I got some gray hair. I graduated from UNL back in 1988, so I'm coming up on 30 years since I graduated. And actually, my background is not software. I will tell you, I have 4 credit hours of programming experience, 3 credit hours of Fortran and 1 credit hour of Pascal. That is my experience. My undergraduate was actually in electrical engineering. And so when I came out of school, I worked as a systems engineer for a company in St. Louis called McDonnell Douglas. And that was really where I learned what engineers do. I really did not really learn that as much in college. When I came back to Lincoln in '95, I started working more, and there was software involved in that, in what we were doing there, software and hardware on these aircraft that we were building down there. When I came back, I started working for almost pure software product companies. And I realized that there was a lot more rigor to how we were developing these complex systems at McDonnell Douglas than really what we were following at some of these software companies. And I didn't fully understand why they were so different. And so this has actually been a bit of a passion of mine for the last 22 years, is to try to find where the intersection of those of the rigor of systems engineering and engineering in general and these other disciplines overlays with what we're doing in software. Because I do feel like I think a lot of people feel like software development is a bit of a unicorn. It's different than the other engineering, and I get some of the differences, but there are also certain practices and certain principles that I see transcend all the different engineering disciplines, and that's what we've been trying to do, is to mold those in a way that makes sense for software development, or at least to take advantage of the things that have been written about and developed over the last 30 years or actually last 40 years in computer science. So last 20 years I've been primarily working in startups since the late 90s, and Nebraska Global is another one of those, as well as the companies that are in there. So tonight I'm talking about innovation. So there's some themes around this innovation process, and some of these names you might recognize. Eric Ries from his Lean Startup. There's some themes here about this whole, we need to create these fast cycles of learning and building, and that's how we eventually get to a viable product in the market, right? Instead of, there was a period in time where all we did was spend time trying to figure out what is this big product we want to build, and then we go off for 3 years, build that product, and then bring that product to market. People aren't doing that anymore. They've learned that they don't have a good understanding of the customers, and they're not a good proxy for what the market might demand. So let's try to get something out there that we can get a toehold and start getting customer feedback and let the customers drive the product development. When we do a lot of kind of greenfield development at Don't Panic Labs. I mean, we're building like version 1 of stuff. And a lot of folks are like that. I really like that, building that first version of something. You know, it feels free or something like that. They have their reasons. One thing I've learned over 30 years is that actually that's the worst time for me. I hate being in this mode where I'm building something that I'm not exactly sure is what the customer needs. It's been way more fun to get products out in the field and start interacting with customers and having them express to you I really like this, but if it did this, it'd really be cool, and just giving you feedback like that and having to kind of synthesize all this feedback and figure out how to engineer a solution that doesn't just solve your problem, it solves all these other people's problems who've expressed it in a different way. That's been way more fun for me. So this whole lean startup, this build, measure, learn, all this stuff is really valuable, a really valuable process for companies who are trying to innovate. And so that's, we've been doing that since we started Nebraska Global. I wouldn't say that, oh yeah, we followed the lean startup method. We're not really dogmatic about methods. We're trying to understand the principles behind that. So in a innovative process, so a lot of this stuff is being driven by the business people, right? The build, the measure, the learn. The build part should be us, right? The measure, the learn. What is our ultimate responsibility in an innovation process? Us being developers. Well, we are the enabler of the agility, right? We're the ones who are taking the lessons learned, working with the product owners, and we're doing the building so that they can go back out and test that product. And that process doesn't just happen for 6 months. The entire life cycle of a product can be driven that way. It doesn't, it's not just something we stop doing after we get to version 1, So how do we do this? Well, we're rapid, we're effective in our response throughout the product life cycle, right? And we're taking advantage of new information, new insights, new ideas, and we're rolling those into the product and they're delivering them out there. We're also collaborating with product owners too. So if somebody comes to us and says, hey, here's what we're seeing in the market with this version of the product, product management thinks we ought to do this. And we take a look at that and say, wow, that could be really difficult to do that. How about if we do this instead that almost gets us there, or maybe a different view of that? We have a responsibility to not just take what's being handed to us by product management and just do it verbatim. We need to collaborate them. This is a team effort. We're trying to accomplish what their needs are in as short a time frame as possible with as high a quality as possible. So we use agile processes. This is a big part of that. And we love these processes for managing our kind of the rhythm of our sprints and our planning, things like that. And there's any number of reasons why these things are valuable. And these are things that we personally experienced by using these. And I will tell you, we don't follow any particular agile methodology. I'm talking about the whole idea of, having short defined sprints where you are trying to add value at the end of every sprint, and you're able to quickly change the priority of what you're working on from sprint to sprint or iteration to iteration. We've been doing variations on that since probably about 2007. Okay, but we float back and forth between Kanban and more of a traditional iteration planning. We're not super kind of dogmatic about that as well. There's no doubt to us that these agile methods enable this business agility that's our responsibility. So what's the problem? Aren't we good? Aren't we set with that? We just need to get mature in our agile processes and we'll be fine. We'll be able to continue to support this cycle of build, measure, learn indefinitely, right? Well, let me point, who's seen this page before? How many people have seen that page before? All right. So there's some guys in here you might recognize. I'm pretty sure that's Martin Fowler there, and I'm pretty sure one of these two guys is Bob Martin. There's a lot of people on here that are really great thought leaders, not just in Agile, but in the field of computer science and software engineering. So this is really a powerful collection of people that was there. Kent Beck, he's the guy who really pioneered test-driven development. I mean, it would have been fun to be in that room. Well, a lot of people are familiar with this page and with these values that I'm sure we've probably all read at one point in time. But I don't know how many people have seen this link at the bottom here, the 12 principles of Agile software. If you haven't been to that, I have it on the next page. So these are the 12 principles of Agile software, and I would highlight 3 of them are towards the bottom. So Agile processes promote sustainable development. So sustainable means we're continuing on, and we're maintaining a constant pace indefinitely. If you've been developing software for a long enough period of time, that line there might give you pause. Because I think most of us who, like I said, who've been around long enough, we've worked on projects, and I have a chart that'll describe this a little later. where we felt like we were moving pretty fast in the beginning, and then things started slowing down a little bit, and 2-3 years into this thing, we're talking about, hey, you know what, we might want to be thinking about burning this whole thing down and starting over. Well, that would not be maintaining constant pace indefinitely, right? This whole continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. And then finally, this my own personal thing, this simplicity thing, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential. Simplicity, keeping things simple. So I think that this particular aspect of the Agile Manifesto is overlooked by a lot of people. And that really is the point of this whole talk, is that Agile by itself is not a silver bullet. If we just decide we're going to be an Agile shop, I think we run the risk of not being able to achieve some of these principles that are really driving that. And I will tell you, if I had a Robert Martin on my team and a Martin Fowler on my team, we would probably be fine. The problem is, the problems we're building today are increasing in complexity. And our development teams and processes vary wildly in their level of maturity. Okay, so if we want Agile to be something that everybody should be adopting, and I think that is true, I think every business can benefit from that, somehow we need to do something about this for sure, and we need to recognize this as well. And I don't think Agile is necessarily going to solve those problems, by itself is going to solve those problems for me. So a little bit more about the complexity thing. So the things that we were doing 10, 20 years ago really almost seem, some of the things almost seem childish to me now compared to what we're dealing with today. You know, we built the first version of an e-commerce platform we built in 1999, which actually was pretty successful. I think back about that, and I'm like, I mean, that, you know, the table stakes for building an e-commerce platform are so much higher just to even enter the market and be competitive than what it was 10, 15 years ago. And I don't think it's slowing down. I mean, Nebraska Global is building, our team of 40-some people is building 3D motion capture computer vision applications for monitoring patients in hospital beds. I mean, that's stuff I wouldn't have even been thinking about a company, you know, in Lincoln, Nebraska being able to do. And there's any number of examples of that stuff happening around here now. The problems are just, the things we're able to solve with software these days, the problems we're able to solve with software these days are continuing in the level of complexity. So I kind of feel like, you know, 20 years ago we might have been building a doghouse. Today it feels like we're building a 3,000 square foot ranch house in many cases. And I would never build a 3,000 square foot ranch house without a design and without a plan. Whereas I probably could draw something up on a napkin and build a doghouse. It wouldn't have been a problem. So this complexity thing is really tricky. And it's tricky because we are kind of limited into what we can do as humans in terms of just keeping complexity in our head. So this is something we're fighting against, kind of not human nature, but human limitations. There's all kinds of talk out there. I think this is the magical number 7 plus or minus 2, this whole idea that we really can only keep the details of maybe 5 to 9 things in our head at any one time. But if I'm expected to understand how this big, gigantic, monolithic application is working in order for me to make a change in the system, that's problematic. Something's going to suffer. I'm going to make a mistake. It's going to take forever to debug this thing. That's how we're slowing down. You know, the technical debt we're injecting into these systems, whether we're doing it on purpose or not, is slowing down our productivity and our throughput. So we looked at this thing and said, Agile is a major component of this. And this build, measure, learn is something that's very important to us. That's down here. But we also see that this Agile process that kind of surrounds this product development lifecycle needs to be paired with things like design and rigor in our product development discipline so that we can have a better handle on managing this complexity. So I'm sure if this is something that you've also thought and had conversations with somebody, I'm sure you've been confronted with some of this stuff here. Hey, we can't afford to do this now. We need to get we need to get that minimum viable product out. I have no time to do this. I'm just crushed for time. Or, hey, this is a classic one. This is an absolute trap right here. You know what? Hey, let's just get this thing out there, a proof of concept, and let's just figure out if this is going to work, and then we'll come back. If it's got legs, we'll come back and we'll re-architect it and build it right. I have never seen that happen. Because what happens is, the only time you have time to come back and make it right is if the product goes out there and nobody cares about it. Because if you get that product out there and people care about it, nobody's going to say, hey, you guys got time now. Don't worry about this backlog of 50 things that are coming in every day that people want in this product. You go ahead and take 6 months and build this thing right. They're going to say, I need this feature, add this in. We don't have time for that. That's the reality of what happens with that. So success is what keeps this thing from happening. And then this one here. No one does design up front. It's not agile. Nowhere in the Agile Manifesto does it say that. And in fact, you saw in those principles, it's pretty clear from those principles, those guys all value design. But I've heard this in many cases. I see it written in blogs and things like that. So one of those guys, Martin Fowler, wrote an essay a few years back on what he called design stamina. Has anybody seen this before? A couple people? This is one of my, this thing shows up in more of my presentations, probably the one graphic I have taken more than anything. I love this chart because when I saw this, I was like, this is a great description of what I think everybody will experience at some point in their life. So there's two lines here. This blue line represents the path of product development if we don't do design, if we don't spend the time to do a good design. And this orange line is the path when we have done good design. And this axis here is this cumulative functionality that I'm adding over time, and then time is across the horizontal axis. And so what he says in this, and I agree with this 100%, there is a period of time, if you're starting a project, where if I'm going to spend a few days doing design and somebody else is just going to get in there and start adding features, that person's going to create features faster than I will. So this is me here on this orange one. This is him. But pretty quickly I'm going to catch him. And there's going to be a crossover line here, because this is that indefinite sustainability that those guys are talking about in those principles. This is the line we need to be on to enable agility and innovation. At some point, this is what he called the design payoff line, that crossover point where it's like, okay, now the fact that I just got in there and started slinging code is now holding me back. And the other thing he points out, and I agree with this too, that point is probably only weeks down the road in a project, especially if you've got a project where it's more than just a couple of people. You know, the bigger your team, actually that time probably compresses sooner because you have just more cooks in the kitchen there, right? So the reality is software design always happens. The question we need to ask ourselves is, are we going to let it be random? Or are we going to want it to be coherent and consistent? And we need it to be coherent and consistent in order to achieve this here. Because he calls it no design, but design happens. There is intent. When the programmer is putting fingers to the keyboard, he has something in his mind. He or she has something in his mind. So there is a design. Just like if I just take a bunch of lumber and just start hammering nails together to try to build that house, there is a design there. It's just not coherent. So again, I point back to this. This is key, and I think it's something that it is overlooked by a lot of people. So the bottom line, we cannot enable business agility if our development environment is on a path to chaos and decreasing our throughput. We're going to get a lot of pressure on us at some point, and rightly so, if we're not doing the right things to kind of continue to enable that. And the other thing is, there's this notion of software entropy. So design isn't something that I just do in that first part of a project and then I just hand it off and everything will be good. Because software entropy is a real thing. This whole idea that without any sort of maintenance or any sort of nurturing, software will begin to rot. You have to maintain a design over the life cycle of a product. You can't just say, this is our design, you guys have at it. You know, let me know if you have any questions. It just doesn't work that way. Because software is a team sport and we're just not all robots and won't always understand the choices we're making and how they might impact an overall design. So Now we get to kind of some of the things that we've done. What are the things that we've had success with that have allowed us to maintain agility? So first, this notion of always engineering. And I'll go into details of all these things. So this idea that engineering is something we're always doing. I'll explain that a little more. Reducing uncertainty. We're trying to increase the proportion of what we understand about the problem we're trying to solve or the requirements we have. Designing for change. Creating a design that was, but by its very nature, enables change to happen within the system and features to be added. Designing for testability. And then lastly, thinking about software as a software program as a collection of services rather than a collection of objects. But before we get into that, I want to give you some case studies because only a few of you are familiar with Nebraska Global and Don't Panic Labs. So let's talk about some of our experiences here. So first I want to talk about is EliteForum. Who here has heard of EliteForum? Some of these people have worked on EliteForum. Yeah. So when the Kinect camera, the first Kinect camera came out in late 2010, early 2011. We bought a bunch of the cameras, like so did a bunch of other folks out there to hack on these things. And there's some open source libraries that would allow you to get access to the raw data off the cameras. You weren't limited. Microsoft didn't have their Kinect SDK out yet or anything like that. Well, we saw this. Hey, there's now a high resolution 3D depth camera for $150. Things that used to cost thousands of dollars. And we're like, this could be a game changer. This could be awesome. So we kind of dove into this and kind of noodled around. We'd also had a partnership with the University of Nebraska Athletic Department to help build technology. I kid you not, they wanted us to help build technology to give them a competitive advantage in both recruiting and in performance on the field. So this was, I give them a lot of credit for that because I thought that was pretty cool, and they really, they put some money behind that too. So we worked with the strength and conditioning department. Actually, one of the guys we worked with is Brandon Rigoni, who works at Gallup now. And now we got a couple of Gallup people here. He was one of the strength coaches we worked with primarily on this. And the idea behind EliteForum was to put these depth cameras on these power racks, and you can kind of see them in here a little bit. These power racks. This is North Stadium at UNL, and have these things watch athletes as they're doing lifts, and track the velocity of their lift and the repetitions, and give them immediate feedback. And that's what's happening here. These are screens that are on each of these things. And then push a lot of that data back to the strength coaches so that they can do some analysis. And then they had a website that they could plan the workouts for these guys. And this is a game. What they had before this was a kind of a linear potentiometer, that string that they attached to the bar. And it had a little LED readout. And they'd put it on the bar and they'd lift and they'd look at the number, and never got recorded or anything like that, never had any data. That was the state of the art for this thing. And velocity was a really important part of measuring athletic performance because you can get power and things like that out of it. So this was a complete shift in terms of the technology. And by the way, this system cost almost as much as that string system too, believe it or not. So we built that and delivered that for them. It's now in use dozens of kind of the elite athletic community. I mean, one year I think we had 2 or 3 of the Final Four basketball teams were using EliteForum. And we also got special forces units from a couple of the different services are using this as well. Millions of repetitions tracked on this thing. So this product took, and this was built not with the Kinect SDK. We took the raw data off the camera and had to build our own computer vision algorithms to track these guys. It took us 10 minutes from the start to when it was in use by the NU football team in the spring of 2013. And those guys, that was no picnic trying to convince them, because any little perturbation of this thing, and they were like, this stuff doesn't work, I don't want to use it. They were a tough customer. We had 8 developers and 2 mathematicians, 2 PhD mathematicians helped us on this thing, and developed that whole system. Essentially what it is today. I mean, it's been continued to be maintained since then, but the nuts and bolts of everything that was being done, we did in about that period of time with that team. and it's continued to be maintained to this day and extended. And this is a little dated. This was from last year. We had one hot fix in the 12 months of last year. Along with all that, we also developed an automated test cluster to test all the machine learning that we had to do within the algorithms. The other one I want to point out is Beehive. And so Beehive is a platform that was built at the same time, by the way, as a lead form. Both these projects were going on simultaneously by our DPL team. And this is a platform for managing things that have properties and events that you do to them. And the biggest, it's designed to be a platform that we can extend to a variety of different verticals. The most successful one we have to this point is what we call Beehive Public Sector. It's a infrastructure management platform for cities. We designed it to work. Our target was like cities of 5,000 to 25,000 because there's like 28,000 of those in the country, and we didn't want to compete with the big ERP systems that Omaha and cities like that would use. Turns out Lincoln has chosen to use ours, and so is Boulder, Colorado. So we're well beyond cities of 25,000. We're into cities of 300,000 and above. So I said it was a platform, so it was also extended. We've built highway construction management systems on that platform. We built a self-service fence design system for another company that's using Beehive as their product engine for being able to, for fencing companies, they don't like to go out and do quotes in person. They like to have something where people can kind of do the first thing on their own, self-service, and then if it's a kind of a strong lead, then they'll go out and interact with people. And then some of you may have experienced this in Omaha. They built something for Arbor Day called energy saving trees, and then Arbor Day would license that or sell that to public utilities. So OPPD licensed this from Arbor Day to give away trees to their residential customers in Omaha a couple years ago. So some of you might have taken advantage of that. Anybody use that to get a free tree from OPPD? Know me? Oh, that's too bad. They were free. So, but it was kind of cool. You know, there's some complexity to this. You drag the tree around, and it'd show you over time how much money you would save in energy because, you know, based on latitude and the angle of the sun and, you know, this, that, and the other thing. So, but these things, it wasn't like it took years to do these things. These things, how much effort did it take to spin up energy saving trees? It was maybe 1 or 2 people. Yeah, it wasn't that much. So Beehive is, you know, selling to cities is a long sales cycle, but they've continued to have traction ever since we started this thing. And now, like I said, they're up to cities the size of 300,000 people, and that's kind of, you're now an enterprise type application. It was 6 months from the start of that, from the conception of Beehive to when it was in use by Grand Island and Kearney here in Nebraska. And its team had 8 developers and only 1 QA person. And they've gotten to a point now, within the first, probably about, about a year or a year and a half into it, they would schedule their releases to happen on the weekend and nobody would even watch it. So they'd gotten their QA processes down where, everything's happening on 1 week sprint cycles. All of our iterations are 1 week long. So I wanted to give you some examples. Now, Chad told me at this point my presentation may not be as jazzy, so this is my gratuitous funny slide that I'm throwing up here to just try to create some levity in the room. Thanks, Chad. Hey, has anybody heard of Gerald Weinberg? He's a pretty famous computer scientist. Actually, he's dealt more in the social psychology aspects of computer science. And actually he has some tie to Nebraska, I think. I think he even has a house. He used to live outside of Lincoln or something like that. Yeah. All right, now I'm going to go into detail on those 5 steps, this always engineering thing. So the idea behind this is, in a lot of projects, we aren't always thinking about the real engineering and design until I'm actually getting to my keyboard and starting to type. We're trying to take that back all the way to the first point where we start getting engaged with the requirements, and that's when we start looking at stories. Let's start thinking about design, thinking about how we're going to implement this, start asking questions at the very beginning. And, you know, I've been in projects and on teams where, you know, we don't really care about the story. I don't want to break down the task. It's all ways, can I just get to the programming thing? And that, if we're not thinking about engineering from the very get-go, then we're losing some opportunities to prevent some downstream problems. So even when we like to decompose stories until they're a week or less in effort. So we don't want, if we see a story that somebody thinks it's going to be a month, we're like, oh, that's too big, too much uncertainty there. Let's break that down. And that breaking down means we're having conversations with people to get a better understanding of what that story is. So how well do we understand this requirements? What's my plan? How big is this story? Is this too much? What other factors do I need to consider? We start decomposing the system, and by that I mean now we're taking this big monolith, and this happens primarily in the very beginning of a project, and we're saying, what are the classes and services that are going on here? How can I isolate further changes in this thing? Now I'm actually in an iteration. I'm getting ready to break down my story into individual tasks. What is the sequence I'm going to take? And this is a classic one. This is the one that, one of the things that really got me thinking more about this whole engineering all along the way is somebody pull a story off the board and a project manager says, I need tasks. And they'd be like, okay, here. And they just write down 3 or 4 things. Here's my tasks. And then when they check in code, they do a commit, small size commit, they'd attach the relevant tasks, and there'd be like 3 tasks assigned to this one commit. I'm like, well, the tasks are not really valuable at that point, right? Because, each commit should be kind of a body of work that's progressing towards the completion of my story. But if each one of my little bodies of work are 3 tasks for this one and 4 for this one, oh, by the way, this same task I had to commit here is also down here, those tasks aren't really useful. And so when we're decomposing stories, don't be just thinking about some random tasks. Think about it in terms of, this is the sequence of events I'm going to take to implement this story. And it's forcing you to think maybe a little more deeply about how you're actually going to tackle that problem. And then finally, test-driven design. How can I maximize adherence to best practices and principles? What am I doing in the development of this test to try to capture and reflect the types of design criteria that we're looking for? So that may be a little nuanced, but I've been in a lot of situations where people just are not really putting their brain to work on a lot of this stuff until they're actually forced to have to start writing some code in their IDE. All right, so reducing uncertainty. So the focus here is this whole notion of an incomplete picture. I'm pretty sure some of this will resonate with you guys. So I get a user story, and the product owner who wrote that user story had a clear picture of what that user story was. In my mind, in their mind, this user story looks like this. All right? And then they explained it to me, and I'm like, oh, I got it. Yep, I think we're on the same page. Here's my picture of it. All right, this is my picture, but I think we're on the same page, and the product owner does too. And then I go to talk to the QA guy, say, hey, you got to get ready. We're going to be working on this cool thing. Here's what it is. And they're like, yep, I got it. This is what it is. All right, do you follow me on this? We all have a different picture. There's some overlap here, granted, but we all have a different picture and we don't realize it. Right? It'd be nice if we could do something to get everybody on the same page there. We really need to try to do that. Let's figure out the gaps in our understanding. What's more, the whole complete picture is probably something beyond we're even thinking here. There's all kinds of hidden assumptions that we're not realizing. The business people, they might not even be thinking very deeply about that story and the implications of that story, or maybe I'm not thinking about it, or maybe the QA guy's not thinking about it. That's a big problem. I'm sure we've all experienced. That stuff's going to get figured out eventually, and it might be when it gets in the customer's hands, right? Or maybe it's late in the game and I'm having to, oh crap, I wish I'd have known that when we started talking about it. Right? I could have done something much better. I wouldn't have gone down this path. So, 2 big problems with incomplete pictures, and it is this idea that, hey, we're all on the same page, we all have a shared picture. It almost never happens with anything of any complexity. And then this other one is, hey, it's our assumption that all the assumptions are known. That big cloud doesn't exist. It's everything that was in those boxes. So our solution is not really super sophisticated. It is, hey, and not new and maybe novel. We need to really spend some time doing some actual engineering and analysis in the form of a design document or a concept paper or a white paper. have some goals of working through these complex problems. And these are things that need to happen in order to reduce the likelihood that we're going to have all these hidden assumptions and a lack of a shared picture. We need to have a stronger conversation between the engineers and the business so that we don't just have a conversation. I say, I got it, I understand it, and it's different than what your picture is. We want to get clarity prior to when we're starting implementation. And I think there's things we can do through these design documents to improve the quality and completeness of our requirements. You know, design documents give it an opportunity or some material thing for people to look at, means that I can get other people involved in scrutinizing my thought process and my approach. They have something tangible to look at. Everybody's on the same page in terms of how we're going to go from the requirements to the design to the implementation. It's not just in my head. The quality of our estimates can improve greatly. Estimates are a big deal for us because I'm sure, like you guys, we don't live in a world where we can just deliver the software whenever we're done. I mean, that may happen in some situations, but we often, maybe we're heading towards a conference and we want to get this next release out before that conference. Well, in general, I just haven't lived in a world where we could just, we can just kind of meander down the road, and when we think it's good, we'll ship it. It doesn't always work that way. And so estimates are a big deal. Giving some predictability to our business and marketing people in terms of when things might be available to them. And then finally, well, not finally, but ability to give a chance for the people who are responsible to ensure that the integrity of the design is maintained. All right, because I mentioned the software entropy thing. If we can't just do design once and expect everything to go on perfectly indefinitely. The way we work through these design documents is we like people to be thinking about things to consider. We want them to work through a process. We don't want to just say, hey, go off and write a design document. We want to give some structure to that. We want to have some consistency in terms of how we're actually discovering these hidden assumptions, or how we're going through the process of trying to consider certain other factors like risks and how we're going to test this and things like that. So it's really kind of a workflow, or not a workflow, but it's a series of things we want people to kind of think through just to try to seed that process. And this is some examples of things. So I feel like if people have something to work from and have a kind of a proven template or process to go through, they're more likely to think of these things. So here's our process. We don't do design documents for everything. But early on, we're trying to identify those things with significant risk, or things we don't understand quite, or things we're not sure how we're going to actually implement it. We're like, okay, this might warrant a design document. We want people to write things down as part of this. Once we've decided that we want to do this design document, we want them to write stuff down. It's that act of writing things down. I'm sure we've all experienced that, where I thought I understood something. As soon as I started writing something down, maybe this was in code, I start coding something, and then I discover something along the way as I'm coding this. Oh, I hadn't really thought about that. I need to handle that situation. That act of writing things down, I think, forces some sort of a thought process in us that gives us, we scrutinize things a little more, or it gives us more clarity, or it forces some sort of a behavior in our mind that tends to uncover a lot of assumptions that we have. Structure, like I said, we create these specific considerations for people to look through. So we structure their thought process around a logical flow, and I'll show you an example of a template on the next page. And this is an important one here, because I think probably when you first saw that I want you to write design documents, you're probably like, what? I'm going to spend a week doing design on this stuff? Now, we're not expecting to uncover everything. We're just trying to get, it's kind of like the 80-20 rule. Let's try to discover as much as we can in as little time, because I think there's a point of diminishing return on this. So let's time box this to an hour or two. If you set aside, remember these stories are fairly small, right? There may be should be 1 week of effort or so. Maybe a little bit bigger. Sometimes we might do a design document on something that was grander because we weren't sure how to break it down. But in general, an hour or two ought to suffice. You ought to be able to go through this and spend that amount of time. And use whatever format works for you. Do it in PowerPoint, do it in Word, draw pictures on a whiteboard. Just write down verbiage. It's not just drawing pictures, but I want you to write down and describe your thought process. And the end result of this design document should be this list of implementation tasks. This is what we're going to do. So this whole thing feeds right into our project management and our story task breakdown. So this is an example of a template. And I know this is an eye chart, but there is a logical flow to these questions here. And you see this very last one. What are the specific steps to implement and what is their level of effort? It starts off with, what is my understanding of the requirements? What is the primary goal or objective? It gets down to here and it starts talking about what are the areas of the existing system that are impacted by this. So what classes and services might I be changing? And if some of these are not applicable to this particular design document, then just skip them. Again, this is not going to go through some sort of formal sign-off process or anything. This is a tool to help with that collaboration with the business, to help give outside perspective on the design, to help uncover hidden assumptions. As soon as this thing is done and we're moving on to development, we might reference this, but it's served its purpose at that point. It might serve a purpose for QA, because we also talk about, hey, are there any special considerations for testing that I think are going to be a problem here? Or what are areas of risk? So there are other things here that other people might find valuable, but this is really just a temporal tool. All right, so that has worked really good for us for trying to manage a little bit of this early uncertainty. So now I talk about designing for change. And you could spend a week trying to learn system decomposition based upon change, but I'm trying to point you in the direction of some influencers that really impacted the approach we're taking. So, yeah. On the last one?
Yeah, just back on you don't have to go back, but I'm more thinking about the process of, okay, we're at the front end, right? We've won a contract, we've got this model that thing we have to do. So how do you have a design document where you kind of like do that first level of, okay, we have to do this, and the piece, how do you document those pieces before you get down to the task level things, like how do you get to that?
That's actually what this process is here. Well, I won't go into a complete description of that, but what we do, what these guys, we follow a methodology by this guy right here, Yuval Lowy. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of him. So I'll just walk through this a little bit. This guy named David Parnas came up with this notion of information hiding and wrote a paper, kind of a seminal paper on this back in 1972. And I think the title of the paper is On the Decomposition of Systems into Modules, I think is the name of the paper. But this is where he introduced this notion of hiding information, what he says there is arbitrary design decisions should be hidden behind an interface and not exposed to a consumer of that module. Right? So think about abstraction. You're hiding away details of how I'm doing something, and you're just exposing an interface that doesn't reveal some of those design details. And he felt that was the best way to keep systems fairly decoupled and minimize the change, the impact of changes. So if I change something in this module, I shouldn't have to change the other modules that might be dependent upon that. Well, that evolved into a lot of the concepts of abstractions and things like that were developed into a lot of the modern programming languages too. And then the Gang of Four, back in their book in the early 90s, their design patterns book, they talked about this whole idea of that designing for change was probably the most rational way to decompose a system, to try to isolate change so that the systems would be easier to maintain. Excuse me. What Yuval did was he took a lot of this and other stuff, and he developed a really simple kind of a protocol or a programming model for how to decompose systems that is really fairly easy to understand. I'd really encourage you guys to go watch his video on the Zen of Architecture. It's out on YouTube. You can find that. It was pretty profound. So he calls it volatility-based decomposition. Actually, if you just Google that on YouTube, you'll find another one where he just talks about that. So let me give you an example of how this kind of manifests itself in the way we approach things. So I have an order placement and shipping system, and And I need to send an email when an order is placed and when an order is fulfilled. And so I might have designed this system, and I will tell you, this might have been the way I designed the system back 15, 20 years ago. When I place an order, I send an email through the SMTP service, the order email. When I fulfill the order, the shipping manager, this class here, sends a text, we'll call it text-based shipping email. So we're sending text-based emails. So all the business logic around building an email and everything is happening in here, and I'm sending it through this SMTP service. So even at the time I implement this, I might realize there's likelihood that there's changes going to occur. And this is kind of getting to the question you were asking. If we know that ultimately we think we want to build this big monolithic system, we can use the knowledge of all that to really come up with a system design. And that's what Jával really helps you with. How do you take all these requirements? We haven't done any, we're not in sprint planning or anything like that. It's really the first calendar week of our effort is taking the whole backlog of stories for any particular project and using those to reveal these areas of volatility and areas of change, and to kind of reason and rationalize through what are the individual constituent services within our system. Does that kind of answer your question? And that's time box as well. That's a week. That's not 6 months of architecture. That is a week. All right, so even when we first built this, I might realize, we're doing the text-based emails because it was easy to do, but we probably are going to want to do HTML emails. And I just hacked in this SMTP service just to get it going. We probably want to go to SendGrid or somebody else that actually knows what they're doing about sending emails. So I knew all this going in, but I designed it this way anyway. The way we would approach this is we say, well, there's obviously volatility in here in the emails. Not only the format of the emails, but the delivery of the emails. It's likely to happen. So I still have my order manager, my shipping manager, my new design. But I have this new manager called Notification Manager. Almost every system we've ever built has something called Notification Manager. And what I'm sending to that, I'm not sending an email to it. I'm just sending order data. So it's very discrete. Maybe I'm only sending an order ID and an event. And by just doing that, you can see I have drastically reduced the coupling between this order manager and whatever I'm delivering to the customer in terms of an email. All right? And so I might do the same thing with the shipping manager. So this guy is going to be taking ownership over that. So I also have this format problem. My format of my messages might be changing. Okay, well I can encapsulate email formatting into its own class or service. And so as the format changes, I can isolate that change to that one thing. Over here, if I went from text-based to HTML, what am I changing? I'm changing both of these things. And I'm changing it in an area that why should Order Manager even care about the format of an email? That's not really, that doesn't seem to be high cohesion there, right? It's not really a single responsibility of Order Manager. He should just be dealing with the sequence of how do I place an order, not what should the format of my email be. So in this case, I'm sending email data in, I get an email body out. Email data is maybe just kind of just discrete order data. And then I have an accessor down below here that's hiding how I'm actually, the mechanism I'm actually using to actually distribute the email. So now, if I update my format to do HTML emails, I'm changing this. If I'm using a new service for sending my email, I'm only changing this. Nobody else knows about this, right? That is this concept of information hiding. The fact that I'm using SendGrid or SMTP, that's an arbitrary design decision that I made, and I've hidden that behind this email accessor, so that when that changes, nobody else cares about it. Does that make sense? All right. So design for testability here. We're winding down. We didn't really do test-driven design up until about the last 7 or 8 years. And I tell you, it was a profound experience for me. And number one was this right here. It really forces you, how many people here are doing test-driven design? A little bit? Yeah. It changes your mindset about how you design software. Before I might be going to implement some method in a class or a service, I almost immediately start thinking about the guts of that method. How am I actually going to implement this thing? Now, when I'm thinking about writing tests at the same time that I'm writing this method, the first thing I think about is what is the signature of that method? What are my parameters that are coming in and what am I sending out? Because I'm thinking about how hard is it going to be for me to test this thing? You know, just the need to be able to write a test for this thing is driving some decisions I'm making about the interface of that method in a good way. It forces the software to be more testable, and it naturally decouples things, because the more the higher the degree of coupling between my test and my test, the class I'm testing, the more difficult it is for me to actually do the testing. So I'm trying to avoid state and things like that. That just makes things more difficult. So naturally, things that we're going to be working to simplify things that are more difficult to test. It allows you to play what-if games. If I'm curious about what happens if I change this, if I add this feature in, what does it do to my system? Well, it starts breaking some tests. All right, I have an idea of, and I talked about the 7 plus or minus 2 things that people can keep in their mind. If I can use my tests as a way to expose to me what might be happening in the rest of the system when I change this one little area, that narrows my field of view to just this handful of things that I really need to understand deeply. I can use my tests to help reveal the rest of it. I don't have to go in and spend hours going through code to try to figure out where are all the things that are impacted by a change that I might make in one class. It definitely makes the code more understandable and readable. I mean, really, you've got built-in sample code, the tests. I'm sure this happens all the time at DPL or any other company that does a lot of test-driven development or has a lot of unit and integration tests in their system. When somebody's looking at how something works, they probably go to the test and they look to see how the test interacts with that class, because it tells you the test was written to reflect how that class or method was intended to be consumed. So you've got built-in documentation, and it definitely enables the refactoring, which is the whole idea behind one of the major ideas behind test-driven design. Anyway, is that you cannot be in a mode of refactoring, in other words, improving the design of your system all along the way while you're adding new features, unless you have unit tests. You've got to have that. All right, my last section, services versus objects. And sometimes this is a little religious for folks, but this was Yuval Louis with iDesign and his method. He's also very big on service orientation. He played kind of a material role in the development of WCF. So in this area, we really focus on separating behavior from data. So I'm not here to tell you that everything we build is distributed services with WCF interfaces. We could be building a standalone single process application. We still look at classes as either behavior or data. All right. We have found that model way easier to design, to decompose into classes, to overlay the requirements of what we're trying to build into a set of services, to do that. Much easier to maintain. The lack of these services tend to be state aware or stateless. So it's not like state isn't involved. It's just that they're rarely, almost never, are they stateful. And so they're way easier to maintain, way easier to test. The extensibility of the system, just everything seems to lay easier. If I'm adding new features and if we decompose based upon volatility, we don't feel like we had to get it exactly right in the beginning, that if we have to change things a little bit, it feels way more malleable to change our services that are involved in the system. Any of the other old object-oriented systems we built just felt like if we didn't get it absolutely right on day one, that thing just, eventually got to a point where like, oh, this whole thing is just hard to deal with. We don't see that. We don't see that same thing. None of the systems we've built have we ever gone back and redone. Even when those Beehive and EliteForm were the first time we even used that methodology that Yuval talks about. And yes, we would do things a little bit different, but it's still easily good enough to, much better than anything we'd ever done previously to that. So, and I think that this whole idea of services and the trajectory we're on right now, really, people should be thinking in terms of services anyway, because a lot of the new technologies that are coming out in cloud hosting is all platforms that are based upon service hosting, right? So whether it's Azure Service Fabric, it's all about compositions of services as opposed to hierarchies of objects. So we're well positioned for that as well. So, summary page. So this is from our experience. I think this marrying of the software design discipline along with these agile methods has been kind of one of the main keys to our success. And I probably can't overstate that. We really try to focus on design happening throughout the process, not just when we get into the code. Let's not skip this analysis part. There's no shortcuts on stuff. Software engineering means that we're doing some engineering. It doesn't mean, the writing of the code, the actually writing of the code is really akin to what's going on the factory floor. That's the manufacturing part of software. The engineering is everything that happens before I start putting fingers to keyboard and coding. So let's put more emphasis on that part of it, and let's start doing more engineering. And I think we can do that, and we have done that quite well in environments that are rapid and have tight feedback loops. They're not in opposition to one another. This whole idea that design is not part of Agile or that it's going to slow us down, that is such a short-term view of this. You're going to be on, if you believe that, you're going to be on this trajectory where every incremental change in functionality is going to take you forever to get done, and you're going to be wanting to rebuild your system, and it just doesn't have to be that way. So, a couple more things here. This last one I wanted to point out. I think if you do test-driven design, it gets you about 80% of the way there on your design. I love that, the fact that you don't even know that you're creating more cohesive, more loosely coupled systems by just doing test-driven design. I think that's a pretty cool side effect of that. So, and this services thing, I think it's just been easier for people to get a handle on thinking about systems in terms of services as opposed to this hierarchy of objects. I'd really like to see us get it. I'd like to see in our education system us spending more time teaching other programming models like service orientation over just teaching object orientation, which really, that was the early 90s. We went to COM and we went to, then we went to service orientation. Now we're going into microservices, and we were so far beyond just object orientation is the only way to build software. But unfortunately, I just don't think there's a lot of that. We're not getting a lot of, this isn't getting as much traction in the environment as I think it should. It's been a total game changer for us. So that is everything I have. There is a more detailed review of kind of our entire product development process that goes into the project management side too, and how we do agile planning and why we break things down the way we do in terms of decomposition and how we estimate things. That is on both the slides and videos, something we gave at an Agile users meeting in Lincoln a few years ago. So that's what I have. Questions? Sorry, we ran about an hour. I apologize for that. That's 20 minutes longer than I like to talk, but I noticed not many people were sleeping. Yeah, hey Rich.
Do you have suggestions on integrating test-driven development mindset and actually process in a mature software department and product that may not have those types of things already?
So, is your concern that the application itself is not really designed to be testable because of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are some approaches there. So one thing I would caution against is this whole idea that we're going to redesign this entire system from scratch. I think it was Martin Fowler again wrote an essay about strangler applications, how we can improve the design of a system over time. And the idea there is that don't just kind of cherry pick things that you think could use tests. As you're adding features to the system, look for opportunities to carve off components of the system that you're going to be changing and adding features to, and design it for testability and maybe make the changes to do that. You're familiar with our programming model. You know, if you had a big monolithic object-oriented application that was highly coupled in a lot of state, you can probably see kind of surface areas there as you're adding new features, like, oh, well, with a little bit of work, I can carve out this one piece of area, and I can develop unit tests around this as we're adding the new features. So that is a much more successful way to move a system to a different, to a design kind of model that is more what your end goal is. I would also say, though, before you start that, I think you should probably spend some time and look at your system and say, where do we ultimately want to be? What is our end goal picture? If we were going to burn the house down and start over, what would we want it to look like? So that you have some idea of kind of what the end game might be. Does that help a little bit? You don't want to try to eat the whole elephant, that's for sure. But you're going to have to sell this idea to people, I think. If the reason that there's not being tested now is because people don't believe in it, you have a little bit of a selling job to do there too. I don't know if that's the case. Yeah.
So how dynamic is your design document? I mean, if you're a month in, things kind of change, do you kind of update the design document, put it out, or
No.
just forget about it?
We just, there's probably been some situation where we've done that, but like I said, it served its purpose. It was akin to sketching something out before I started doing something. It was a process to insert between reading a story and writing code. It was this intermediate process that's like, okay, let me use this as a tool to kind of reveal more stuff to me before I get in here. Because there's more insights you're going to get as you're developing the code as well. I mean, you're never going to get a full picture there. I mean, software development is just one discovery and insight after another. The whole idea behind refactoring is that we can never really get an ideal design before we've actually implemented the software. Steve McConnell talked about software design being a wicked problem. That many problems we're trying to solve with software, we don't really know the solution until we've actually solved the problem. So it's kind of, you're seeing it in rearview mirror. So yeah, there's no, like I said, they may get used sometimes by other folks, but they mostly get used as examples that we say, hey, if you got to write a design document, here's an example of a couple that we did that you can use to model that. So we're not big on heavy documentation and things like that for stuff like that. The only reason it's a document in and of itself is because the act of writing something down, I think, is a useful tool to get people thinking. Yeah?
So things going to microservices and adding new features in microservices, what do you have to watch for to keep that from turning back into the giant monolithic Titan company you're trying to replace?
I want to make sure I understand your question.
So you got your big monolithic system that's trying to add features to it, get rid of that Titan company. So you start that microservice.
Right.
So the kind of things you have to watch for so you don't just recreate what you're trying to replace.
Well, you're going to have to, like I said, you're going to have a design, an end-game design that is kind of rational. Like this whole, I designed this whole system where I've tried to encapsulate change and volatility. Okay, so this is my master plan. Remember, I said that you have to nurture that. You just can't put that on a wall and say everybody keep going. So you really do need to have. We have the notion of a lead engineer on all of our teams, and our teams, we'll call them like 5 to 6 people. That's as big as any one team will ever get. And that person's number one job is to maintain design integrity. So anytime the other 5 developers, they're building features and they create pull requests to review those features. Other people on the team might look at those pull requests, but the guy that really matters is that team lead. The thing he's looking at there, number one is, are we doing anything in that pull request that violates the integrity of our design? And if it does, he's sending it back. If not, he's the one who merges it into master. So I'm a big believer that you have to have a human that is making sure, that is overlooking what's going on and maintaining design integrity. If you leave it to individual people, it's just not going to happen. We just don't think that way. The individual people may not have the big picture in their mind. It's like any other engineering project. On any sort of major project, you probably have a chief engineer. That guy, that's what his job is. He's maintaining conceptual integrity of the design. That was something Fred Brooks talked a lot about in his Mythical Man Month. Was, part of the success of the IBM 360 that he talked in there is that they forced the maintenance of this conceptual integrity of the design of that system. So I don't know of any automated ways other than having that guy or that girl who's a check and balance against wandering off the path there. Any other questions? Yeah, Rich, again. All right.
This might be slightly off topic, but you did mention that you guys are big on documentation. So one thing that we've experienced in Buildertrend, as we grow the team, we bring in new people. Our product is 10 or 11 years old, very mature. There's a lot of stuff that maybe isn't immediately obvious to the new hire. Have you guys experienced any pain points there, or have you mitigated any of that type of stuff?
Yeah, we do maintain a lot of our architectural design documents because that does help bring people on board, and it helps describe kind of why the system is composed of the services that it has. That's more of a graphical thing. As teams grow, your communication mechanisms have to grow as well. So in a team of 3, having a formal document that describes things may not be necessary because we have verbal communications working great for us. We're all sitting right next to each other. But as teams grow, there's necessarily more effort required to keep the communication levels that are required. So we haven't gotten, we're at a size now where we're probably doing things a little more formally than we were when we were 4 or 5 people. But I guess my point with that is let's just not create documentation because we feel like it's something that needs to be done. Let's create it because we're trying to solve a real problem with communication. And that's the thing, the most efficient development team is a team of 1, right? When you get a team of 2, now communication necessarily is decreasing the effectiveness of that team. So maybe a team of 2 is worth 1.7, 1.8 people. A team of 3 is maybe worth 2.6. That communication burden gets pretty high. So I don't think there's just like the Agile Manifesto, they don't think documentation is not valuable. They prefer working software over exhaustive documentation. But at the bottom there, they say it's not that while we value both things, we value working software more than exhaustive documentation. And I think that was really insightful of them to say, look, every situation is a little bit different. Sometimes we do need more of that. So, what other questions? Or any questions about DPL or Nebraska Global? Anybody here from Lincoln? Or are you guys all from Omaha? Yeah?
Well, I did have a question about your company.
Yeah.
You guys have an interesting, I've heard a little anecdotal information about kind of there's some work. You guys do some work for equity model type stuff, right? Can you I'm just curious about that.
Yeah. So this question is that about the work we do in exchange for equity. So we really, Don't Panic Labs, the engagement we have with folks is everything from traditional kind of time and materials contract, hourly rate, all the way to some projects where we did 100%, the work was in exchange for equity. There was no financial compensation to us. And then we've seen everything in between that as well. So we've done things where we were partially compensated and got some equity, or we got some rev share as well as some compensation, things like that. And we love having some skin in the game. We're very, we were first and foremost building startups, our own startups and our own products and our own companies. And we're doing Don't Panic Labs engagement the exact same way we did these other products. So we're not changing anything. We're working with different product owners and different product managers. And so we like having a little skin in the game on each of these things. And a lot of times we tailor that to what the client wants. Sometimes clients just want to pay us money to build the product for them, and that's okay. You know, we still need to actually make money, so that, you know, having somebody actually paying us to do work is important. But sometimes they also would like to have a tighter relationship with us too, and so we kind of work with them to come up with something that makes sense. A lot of times, you know, we try to avoid situations where we have to do a lot of heavy diligence, where we, you know, like you would normally when you're doing an investment. And if we're doing a pure debt for equity, the diligence requirement is much higher, because now we have to start looking at what is the risk profile of this idea, what's its business model, just like you would if you were because we're effectively investing a lot of dollars into that. And so some of these other models that we have that are more of a hybrid don't require us to do as much diligence. And so some ideas that we wouldn't normally invest a lot of dollars in, because it's just not an area we understand. Like consumer applications, that whole business is not something we understand. Our products are kind of enterprise products that we sell to businesses. And so to the extent they kind of look like that, we're much more likely to be willing to do more of a dev for equity. But if somebody comes and says, because we've done some of this, we've built some commercial mobile applications, and we're like, we love this project, what you're trying to do here is really cool. Not a good thing for us to invest in, because we just don't understand the commercial market. We don't have models in place, and we don't have people in place that can do the level of diligence to really ensure that we're making a good investment in that. So we like to be really super flexible on that thing and try to match our needs to their needs and create a kind of a win-win there for us. So does that kind of answer? We have a mix of what we're doing. Last year, I would point out, so if you look at our kind of what our hourly rate is for consulting and treat that as dollars invested in startups, last year we did over $400,000 in investment in startups through either rev sharing models or reduced compensation or whatever. The opportunity cost that we put in there by not collecting a fee was over $400,000, which probably made us one of the larger fifth in Nebraska last year. Don't Panic Labs was in startup investment. Probably didn't hear about that either. We do a really crappy job of media communication, because remember, we're a bunch of engineers. We're not out there broadcasting that stuff. And this year I think we won't. I don't know if we'll do as much as that, but who knows? You know, we've already done a couple of different ones this year along those lines. And that's an important part of the mission of Nebraska Global, is to try to enable technology startups. We thought that because when we started Nebraska Global, Nebraska was 52nd in the country in venture capital investment. We were behind Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. So we were dead last. Okay, we're not there anymore, but we're not even sniffing probably the top half of the country. But we're definitely not 52nd anymore. So we thought access to money was the biggest problem for startups, and actually that hasn't been the problem. The problem has been more the types of ideas that people are pursuing may not be good investable opportunities for people in Nebraska. So, but we still feel like it's really important to enable a lot of these, the ideas that are good. We want to be there to help people get off the ground, because a lot of people having these ideas don't have access to technologists. So that's a big mission of what we're trying to do.
That actually kind of leads into another question. So I kind of feel like I have an entrepreneurial spirit, but I also, I like the comfort that I have right now with a good paying job. I have kids that are at school. I have good health insurance, all that kind of stuff. But have you ever seen something that would put some structure around somebody like doing some development for equity type of opportunities, but in addition to a full-time employment, but it not just be some random hodgepodge thing where you're just finding, just a random guy that's got the crazy idea that ends up, you know what I'm saying? I don't know if I'm making that clear.
I don't know. Brian, did you hear it? Brian deals with, come on up here. This is Brian Zimmer. He does a lot of our, He's the this guy is the reason that Dopang Labs is almost 30 people now. So when he started, he really, there was Brian and 2 cats probably 4 years ago practically.
I didn't know if there was some kind of, I guess I could call it a matchmaker type of thing, where it's like you got some people that are very passionate about an idea, but maybe kind of like your customers, but you guys have a team of full-time people, but there's a lot of people out there that are very technically capable. Don't necessarily want to go live the startup life or can't because of their personal situation.
But want to be involved.
Yeah, or like saying, yeah, you know, I got some time. It's a really interesting technical challenge. I'd be willing to put in 15 hours a week towards it, get a minimum viable product going,
Yeah.
then reevaluate and see, okay, here's what do we think we have something here. Or,
Actually, there is. We do often get asked questions by people who like, you know, we're just not a good option for them for whatever reason. In many cases, it's probably because their product is not something they need. They don't have, you know, a ton of capital to invest, and their product is in a market that we wouldn't feel comfortable doing a dev for equity in. And so they will often ask us, well, how do I get connected with people? How do I find a technical co-founder
yeah, that's exactly
that'd be willing to do this? That question does come
Your
up.
question was like, you know, matchmaking ways.
Yeah.
So like I'm more personally, I'm more like would be more comfortable with a technical co-founder where it's like I'm not particularly passionate about this idea, but I'm passionate about the solving the problem technically.
Yeah.
So
I'm not a. Go
I
ahead.
think some of the best ways I've seen are participating through some community events. Is anyone in here familiar with the Startup Collaborative, this space that we're in
just
right
to
now?
I mean, it's pretty new, so I haven't been down here before.
I think, you know, this model here, it's a company acceleration model, and it's been sponsored by the Chamber. It's a little different than a lot of the accelerator programs that exist. Like most of the ones around the U.S., it's like, you know, founders apply for it, they get a little bit of money, they take a big equity chunk of your company, you've got 90 days with this accelerator to go full time. Here in Omaha, you've got the Startup Collaborative. It's this really unique model where it's more corporate sponsored. So like companies going through this model don't have to give up any equity. They also do a lot of their programming in the evenings so that you can nurture your startup company along with your day job. And right now, for a lot of the companies going through it, they actually have like business co-founder or business founders who are seeking their technical co-founder right now. So with the Startup Collaborative, they've got just a lot of events like 1 Million Cups. If you go to their website, you'll see a lot of the things they put on. So here in Omaha, this organization's like this great resource just to start mixing with people who are experimenting on some ideas. And I know a lot of them are just looking for that early technical co-founder to help them put a little something out there that's a little more real to help them figure out if there's something onto it. But that's the way we've seen a lot of the connections being made from just those chance meetings at some of those community events.
If you can work out of your office for a day, you come here, like we come here Wednesday mornings and morning cups, and we can go work upstairs. There's meeting desks, and if you're here for 5 or 6 hours, you won't need to make a whole bunch of different people. So it's kind of a fun day if you're here. Just kind of work with them.
Oh, that's the 1 Million Cups.
1 Million Cups is in here on Wednesday mornings.
Oh,
right?
Yes.
Yeah, then you can, next floor up, they have desks and stuff, you can go work for a day there. So.
Or you can even, there's those tables over on the side here, those are another co-working area, but there's about, I think, it's about 20 or 30 startup companies that are actually located on these 2 floors too, so it's just a really cool, dense area. If you guys have any kind of a startup itch, you should just come spend some time here. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and by the way, even if those startups already have a technical co-founder that might even be full-time, many of them would probably love to have the opportunity to have part-time skilled developers that could contribute. They end up being very resourceful. Very few of them are just like cash rich and just can be hiring a lot of full-time people. So, yeah, I think that's I think the Startup Collaborative would be a great way to kind of run into those people and those opportunities. That question gets asked quite a bit. We often don't have a very good answer for that because we don't have a Rolodex of developers that are looking to be co-founders or to contribute. Yes, Andy.
Is there a class that you would learn about this?
Oh, class, yeah.
Maybe you should reframe it as, you know, you've seen a challenge with developer education.
Oh.
Maybe maybe propose what you.
Well, why don't you do-
No, what you've been noodling on as a solution. You've done one prototype class.
Yeah.
And see if that resonates with these people.
So I would mention, if you go to don'tpaniclabs.com, and there'll be an education link there. One of the things we've kind of seen over the last 4 or 5 years, there's not a lot of good. Am I not this? Oh.
Shameless plug.
The shameless plug. Well, I think this is. Yeah, so I think this is very high level here. What we've tried to do is create a professional development education experience over 1 week where you would come in and participate in a software design and development experience through that week that would be about 60 to 70% hands-on. And Chad and I built an entire e-commerce application that is built using kind of these design methodologies and built to be testable and things like that. And we also built a legacy one that doesn't look that way. It looks strangely a lot like the e-commerce system that I helped build in the early 2000s. And the idea is we walk through a lot of these design principles and practices that, again, we didn't invent. This is all stuff that is out there in the world that many people have heard of but haven't been able to put to practice. And the whole idea of this class was to give people hands-on experience doing this type of stuff so that hopefully they can bring that back to their business and start applying that. And so we even, as part of this class, Chad and I follow up with everybody over time just to work with them to try to mentor and coach them to help give them advice on how to approach some of the challenges they're having with trying to do this stuff in the workplace. So we probably have one in the end of June in Lincoln. We're looking to do one in sometime late summer in Omaha, but you can find out more about the contents of the class if you go to our website. Anything else you want to add about that, Chad?
Nope.
Okay.
Just say the whole goal with what Doug was trying to do is it felt like there was a lot of good educational things for developers as they're getting going, but there seemed to be this gap for developers that maybe had 3 to 5 years experience who wanted to kind of move to the next level, and going to a conference wasn't cutting it, or just doing a plural site or something wasn't cutting it. So that's what we're trying to do to maybe move the needle a bit for developer education in that area. But if you guys feel that problem or have some other thoughts on how as a development community we can try to address helping people become more senior, take that next step towards being a more disciplined developer, we'd love to talk to you about that because it just feels like something that's missing in our practice.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I mean, it used to be I'd go to TechEds in the early 2000s because I could sit there and talk with some of the program managers and really kind of understand kind of what they're doing in the various frameworks. But now you can get all that stuff online. Those guys don't go to these conferences as much anymore, and all the lectures and seminars and sessions are online, and they all tend to be about the latest framework or the new technology. What in there is about designing software? What education opportunities out there are about putting best practices independent of technology? None of this stuff is .NET specific or JavaScript specific or anything. This is all just foundational good software engineering. What education opportunities out there are there for people? Because they probably didn't get it in their undergraduate education. Software engineering is a one class in college, and who knows what you might have been talking about during that class. So this was really trying to fill that gap for people that are kind of already out there. And I should mention we're doing this class for a company on their site too. We can if there's interest of a company that might have 6 people or so that might want to, we can do something at their location. We could come to Buildertrend and do it. So yes. Any other shameless plugs I should be talking about, Andy? Okay. All right. Any other questions or anything like that? Well, I appreciate everybody coming out. It was, I realize this is a different venue for you, but it sounds like there might be some people who got to come to this that wouldn't normally have gone to this meeting. So, thanks.